I'm Ben James. I present the BBC's World Have Your Say programme on BBC World Service Radio. Sitting next to me is our science editor, David Shupman. David, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And we're here because so many stories that we post about space that you're contributing to. What have we talked about recently online? We've talked about the Mars One project. This is the Dutch organisation's plan to send people to live on Mars in a decade from now. We were talking about the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2 just yesterday. And when we talk about space and space exploration on the BBC, so many of you want to get involved, so many of you want to contribute. That's why we're here with this Hangout, to give you another opportunity, a different opportunity to talk about these issues with like-minded BBC viewers around the world, and also to talk to David Shupman and maybe ask him some questions about the future of this sort of stuff. So great to have you with us, David, and great to have you guests with us so far. And by the way, wherever you're watching this around the world, you can contribute by posting underneath the video as you're watching it on Google+. You can also use our Facebook pages and our Twitter feeds. The hashtag is BBC Mars to get involved in this conversation as you watch it. Oh, and by the way, Benji here to my right in the studio is helping control the Hangout if you're wondering why he's sitting there. So thanks, Benji, for your work on this project too. Let me introduce you to guests who are with us from around the world. Let's start in Phoenix, Arizona.
Hi, I'm Amy Shertitle. I'm a spaceflight historian, and I have a lot of opinions on Mars and manned missions to Mars, so looking forward to getting into it.
And to Hull in the north of England. And there is something of a delay on that line to Melissa, and we will try to clear that up because we're having a few little problems with her, but not to Rajat, who's in Mumbai, I don't think. You can hear us, can't you, Rajat?
That's right, and I'm Rajat Agarwal from India.com. I cover personal technology, and I have a lot of opinions about space. Though I don't cover it, but I love space and the idea of going into space.
And in London?
Hi, I'm Sunny. I'm a composer and a musician, but I love everything to do with science, physics, space, and I'm a real fanboy, and so I've got always opinions about anything to do with science. So it's great to be here.
I will also speak to the person you currently see as a penguin with the red bow tie. That's Euromaestro, who's with us from Paris, France. And we're talking about spaceflight. We're actually trying to sort out a camera being plugged in there at the moment. Once we've done that, Euromaestro, we'll be with you. Let's start by talking about...
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you shortly. David, let's start by talking about Mars One, because this has really captured a lot of people's imagination. And we'll talk to Melissa in a moment, who has applied to be on that project. A number of people getting in touch to talk about feasibility. So what are the sticking points that you see with a settlement on Mars so soon, in 10 years?
How long have we got?
Half an hour, but shorter, please.
You could very easily think of a dozen deal breakers that would make this impossible. The team behind Mars One say they have thought through every conceivable problem, but number one, the rocket. How do you actually get there? Their preferred rocket has not yet flown. It may do a test flight next year. They're hoping to launch it towards Mars with a supply mission in 3 years' time. That's a very tight time frame for any space mission. Secondly, how to keep the astronauts alive with no resupply for 6 months all the way from Earth to Mars, let alone getting set up on Mars. And then beyond that, there's surviving on Mars itself. It's a very hostile environment. You can never step out of the capsule without a spacesuit. You're entirely dependent on whatever systems you've got on Mars to keep you going. It's a brilliant idea for a TV show, and I wish them every success in trying to make this work, but I've just given you a taste of the kind of incredibly difficult technical challenges that lie ahead of them. Space is tough, which is why space is very expensive, which is why we're not living on the moon or Mars right now. If it was easy, it would be happening now.
And Sunny, you're a self-proclaimed space enthusiast. Having heard some of those potential sticking points, does this project excite you? Is it something you'd want to try to take part in?
Well, not quite sure about taking part in. Permanent exile from Earth is not something... I love science. I'm not quite sure whether I'm that dedicated. But excited, absolutely. I mean, I think that when it comes to the question of whether we should do these things, I think that absolutely, because every time we try to push forward, do something new, go to the limits, we always inevitably invent things and discover things that have huge uses for the rest of society and in technology. So it's by pushing forward in these areas that we get all sorts of unintended and unforeseen benefits that come from it. So and at comparatively little cost. So that's not a question. All the questions I have are the ones that David said, which is the feasibility problem. You only have to begin to start thinking about it to realise what a monumental task it is to even think about going.
And lots of people, as I said, have been talking about this, raising questions of their own. Edward posted on Google+, it depends on how fast structures can be built, how safe it will be in regard to meteor showers, and how well animals can survive in those environments as a food source. Just on the animals point, cows in space, would that be part of this?
Well, we don't think it is. I mean, they're talking of kind of space-age allotments to grow vegetables. I mean, they're hoping to raise enough food effectively through a kind of greenhouse system. But I mean, huge questions remain about that. I mean, they're being, to give them credit, the Mars One people are being very inventive, very imaginative. They're tapping into some great ideas. It may be that in the course of the next few years someone can crack this, but no one's done it before.
Melissa, I'm hoping you can hear us now, because you have applied to go on this mission, to be part of this project, to live on Mars by 2023 potentially. Why is it you've applied?
The idea of a dream like this coming true and being part of it, that's an amazing thing to do. You're saying that it's not possible. Now, how do we know it's not possible? I want to put my life in somebody's hands who know what they're doing. I trust them completely. I'll go with it.
And is it something you've always wanted to do? Lots of
Who
people
knows?
talk about space.
Nobody got any...
Sorry, go on.
Stay back.
You're just about to say a point I think a number of people I've seen raising. I think you're about to say no one's got anywhere without trying, something to that effect. And other people on our Facebook page were raising
That's right.
Yesteryear, Captain Cook and all the rest of it.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. I mean, unless people actually do something and go for this, it's never going to happen. So we've got to try. It needs to be explored. And if everybody just sits there and says it's not possible, well, then it isn't possible. We've got to do it. And the only way we can do it is by people accepting the challenge to do it.
Amy and Phoenix, come in there, because you've been talking about this with some of your followers on Twitter. What sort of conversations have you been having?
Well, I mean, the other hurdle that I see that we haven't mentioned yet is that there's no way to actually land a payload heavy enough, like with men inside it, on Mars safely right now. Forget for a second about the men. What if one of their supply ships doesn't make it, and they lose food? I mean, what's going to happen when, you know, some of the vital parts to build a habitat or to build food don't make it or don't survive the trip? Is the crew going to eat each other? I mean, how much are we willing to just sort of like make it a Lord of the Flies type situation if it all goes terribly wrong? I think there's a lot of things wrong with this model. I mean, I'm all for, you know, pushing forward in space, but this kind of seems too problematic to really come off.
Rajat, we haven't heard from you yet. What's your take on these issues?
Well, there would certainly be issues like this every time you have an aspirational project like this. But again, you know, who knew back then that, you know, one day we would land on the moon, right? We are still talking 10 years. Probably it might take 25 to do it, but you need to make a start somehow. And what I like is the fact that these guys are actually thinking, though I agree that it looks more like a television show right now, a reality show, going out of space and being broadcast 24/7, 365 days. But having said that, at least they are thinking, and probably this could actually lead to more developments, more people start thinking about it, like we are talking about it right now. And who knows, with more people who actually do the stuff and know about these things, they come into the picture, they point out what's wrong, and probably come out with solutions that can make it happen. But I'm certainly not sticking for the 10-year deadline right now. That sounds too ambitious.
It's the timescales that I think that surprised me the most. It's like 10 years. Wow, that seems very, very, very optimistic.
Yeah, I spoke this morning to the boss of Mars One, Baz Lansdorp, and he admitted it's a very tight time frame. He said if there's a delay of a few years, it doesn't really matter that much. The key thing is to try to get the key building blocks of the project in place, namely get the TV shows up and running, attract the sponsorship. The main source of income is the sponsorship, then start placing orders for the various missions to go off to Mars to prepare for the colony. I mean, like you, I cannot see this happening by 2023. Will it take the inventiveness of the private sector to get humans to Mars? Well, yes, maybe, but over a longer timescale, I think.
Well, I would just like to say, to put that in some historical perspective, although the 10 years seems very aggressive, we have to look back at 1960 and 1961 when John Kennedy said, we'll put a man on the moon. This is at a time when we weren't even capable of putting men into space, and he said, we'll do this within 10 years, a man on the moon and back. And it shows that we are capable of doing some amazing things if we have the political will and the willing to take the risks and steps necessary to do it.
I think that's right. I just think, sorry, Amy, just very quickly to finish my point. I think the thing there with Apollo was that you had the Cold War. There was a strategic imperative for America to beat the Russians to something, namely get a man on the moon and back safely. That we don't have that imperative now. There's a commercial imperative if this business model is to succeed, but there isn't that kind of driver we saw in the 60s that got people within the decade to the moon and back.
Go on, Amy.
Yeah, I was going to sort of make the same point, that the Apollo model is not something that we should really point to as the way forward in space, because, I mean, Apollo wasn't, it was technologically brilliant, but it also wasn't technologically sort of a nice foundation to actually build something. I mean, we couldn't set up a moon colony with the lunar module. It was designed specifically for its purpose within its time frame, and it doesn't really have applications beyond that at all. So talking about using that sort of, I call it a crash program, because it was really just cobbled together to get there in front of, or ahead of the Soviet Union. Trying to take that model into something that you want to last for a really long time, I think is really problematic. And I think it's, I mean, barring all the political and the social and historical context that we don't have now to push that kind of effort forward, it's kind of a dangerous comparison to make, I think.
And someone called Seshadri posted on our Google Plus page to talk about who should be doing these projects. We've obviously talked about Mars One, but other projects about human settlements outside this planet in future. He says we should explore new habitats now that we're saturating the one we already have. Make this an international venture, he says, with multiple government and private sector participation. And of course, we saw Richard Branson's organisation's flight yesterday that we've been reporting on, and that's very much come from the private sector. But how do you see the model for these projects in future?
I think we're seeing the greatest imagination, if you like, the greatest energy from these private sector companies. I mean, that was a milestone for Richard Branson to get Spaceship Two to go supersonic for 15 seconds last night over the States. He's not yet at the stage of being able to take passengers, but he's on the way to that. I think seeing SpaceX successfully twice deliver cargo to the International Space Station, private company, its own design for a rocket, it is another kind of achievement. So as I say, I think if we are, and Elon Musk, the boss of SpaceX, I interviewed him a couple of years ago, very interesting guy. He says that, as a race, we are destined to become a multi-planetary species. He's got this vision for getting out beyond Earth. And I think it's possible that it it will be the private sector that actually does that. The question is how it's managed. And, you know, do you want a kind of commercial free-for-all in the next century with different outfits crawling all over Mars, or should it be managed and controlled in some better way?
And let's talk about that future then of humanity as an interplanetary species, and a number of people raising that. Actually, Darlington is following this from Liberia, posting on our Facebook page. It wouldn't be a bad thing to move to Mars because Earth is getting overpopulated, and to help reduce the problem, I'd definitely move to Mars. Well, thanks very much indeed for that, Darlington. And also, Kevin posted on our Google Plus page, humans will die out, he says, without ever settling on other worlds. Climate change, resource depletion, emergent disease and overpopulation, war, greed, stupidity, short-term thinking. It's quite a list there from you, Kevin. Thanks for sending that. But Rajat in Mumbai, do you see this as a necessity for humanity to explore other worlds and be elsewhere?
Absolutely. You know, I totally agree with that, that that is probably the only option that we have. In fact, a few years ago, I was listening to Stephen Hawking at a TED Talk where he mentioned that, you know, like human civilization, we have a span of a few thousand years and then everything is sort of reset. You know, like we don't know what happened 4,000 years ago. All we have are, you know, from fossils and stuff like that, or whatever we dig as to what actually happened there. So we don't know, and the only way to survive probably is for going out into space, inhabiting other planets. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Who else wants to come in on that?
I think it makes sense in the long term.
How long is long?
Very, very. I'm thinking thousands of years. I think that actually, even though it's very popular mindset to sort of say, we've ruined the Earth, we haven't really. We're learning that we should treat it better, but actually the Earth is quite resilient. We're trying to do things to make things better now, and so that's great. And I don't think there's any immediate need to go to other planets to live. However, to keep it in our minds and to be working towards that sort of thing is probably a good idea, in the same way it's a good idea to develop technologies in case an asteroid were to be on a collision course with Earth. It's a good idea to develop things for that eventuality. But I don't see why not. I mean, Mars, I don't see why this project isn't saying, well, if they can get the funding and they're willing to solve all these problems, why don't they try to start a colony on the moon? We've been to the moon, we know how to get there, it's easier, it's closer. When you add Mars into the equation, we've never sent even a manned mission just to look at Mars yet. I mean, that in itself is such a difficult prospect, even for a government to be involved in that. So to have a privately funded project to go all that way to do something so difficult and in such a short, ridiculously short time frame, seems if they put all that effort into saying, well, why don't we just put some people on the moon? Because we haven't been back there.
But there's an answer, isn't there? I mean, would we be having this discussion if there was a plan to have a colony on the moon? We're having this discussion because it's far more interesting to talk about a colony on Mars. Surely there's something exotic and alluring about Mars. I mean, notwithstanding all the incredible practical difficulties, there's something that gets conversations going when you say, oh, people might live on Mars. And then throw in this amazing notion of the one-way ticket. And then you come to a kind of fascinating crossroads in people's lives. And I'd love to hear, if Melissa wants to contribute to this, what it is that's going on in people's heads that think, okay, I'll leave Earth for good, finish my days on another planet, not return, and die on Mars. Now that's an amazing thing to think about. People who emigrated in the 19th century to Australia would have had the same thought. I'm going to another continent, I won't come back. But at least the other continent had air, water, green fields, other people. It's a big step to go to Mars.
Melissa?
I don't think it's actually that big a step.
Would you have signed up for this if it was the moon and not Mars?
No, because the moon's been conquered. It's already been conquered. This is something totally new.
And the rest of you come in there, because David there was talking about the apparent allure of Mars over the Moon, say, or maybe other planets. Can any of you encapsulate, maybe Amy or Euromeister, you're trying to come in there? What is it about Mars, do you think?
Well, I think, as was just said, I mean, the moon is something we've already done, and I think Mars has always had a certain fascination that's been held by us, and I think it's the next big step. And, you know, we've always been looking for another planet to eventually colonize, and it's part of man's desire is to always to explore further and go further. You know? This is like the new world.
But isn't there a really interesting thing here? You know, explorers through the centuries always had the aim of coming back. They would explore, they'd discover a new world. Christopher Columbus, for example, you know, had the intention of going out there, coming back to tell his stories and bring back riches. This is a different notion, but it's a one-way ticket. And I think that's something which we could discuss more. It's like,
well,
what is it that drives people to think about a one-way ticket to another planet?
Rajat in Mumbai.
Yeah. So here are a couple of things. You know, one, how this whole thing is funded, right? It's a reality show, right? And what he talked about, you know, the 18th century, Christopher Columbus and all, today they have television, right? They are planning about live streaming the entire mission as it happens. So when you talk about that, you know, there is no need to come back as such to talk about it. Right, everyone is seeing what's happening there. But the biggest problem I have is how it's being funded. You know, selling off rights to a 24/7 live stream. You know, it sort of does not sound the same to me. Then, you know, it looks as if they are just trying to capitalize on something, make it a sort of a show more than something of an expedition.
And on that point of the one-way ticket, somebody else was trying to come in there. Was that Euromeister? Maybe it wasn't.
Yes, it was me. I'm sorry. I was just going to say on the point on the explorers, it's true that the explorers wanted to return, but on the other hand, if you look historically, you had all these colonialists who left the old world with the express purpose of going to the new world and with no intention of coming back, and they had no idea what to expect. It was new virgin territory, and they were willing to set up new lives and start, you know, a whole new world. And
so we're talking more Pilgrim Fathers than Columbus. We've got to that stage.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to that stage.
My issue with this is somewhat deeper in that with the people going off, emigrating to a new continent, the new world, if one of them died, or if one of them got sick, or if one of them changed their mind, the rest of the lives of every single person on that trip was not impacted by that. When you send astronauts into space, every single one of them has PhDs up to the eyeballs, and it has perfect health, perfect vision. And not only that, they're psychologically screened to be the sorts of people who can live in a box for months on end and work to an absolute perfect level every single day, to a very strict regime, because the lives of every single person on the space station and in the space on the mission depends on each other. And if one person gets sick or dies of a heart attack or goes crazy or just changes their mind, suddenly the entire thing becomes very you get all sorts of new variables, as difficult as it already is. So my issue is that they've put out this thing saying, oh, who wants to go to Mars? But in reality, if this was to become a real thing, you would have to send trained professional scientists that are absolutely, because otherwise the risk is just too great.
Melissa, come in there. I don't know whether you have a scientific background, or you're coming at it from a completely different direction here, but address Sonny's point there.
Was she talking to me then? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sonny was just talking about...
No, I have no scientific background whatsoever, but I do know that if I get accepted for this programme, there is a lot of training that goes into it. There's like 7-8 years of training that I would have to go through, and it's intense training. I think it takes more than what people have learned in the past in life to be doing something like this. It's about personality, it's about drive and everything else, because when you're going out somewhere for so long, if it was a bunch of scientists who all thought the same and had the same, you know, there was the same people, they wouldn't get on. They need a totally different variation of people to be doing this expedition. I can be trained. Anybody can be trained. 7 years of intense training. Yeah, I think it can be done.
So for settlement, you're arguing you need a greater mix of people. I mean, you're obviously one of the great many of people who've applied to this. At the moment, the top-rated man on the site is a guy called Anders from Sweden, 51. He says he's got goofy, not corny humour. He says he often gets the feeling he doesn't belong here, but out there in space, and that's his motivation for going. And some of the qualities that are listed are resilience, adaptability, curiosity, ability to trust, creativity, and resourcefulness. Amy, what do you think about the qualities that would be needed for a human settlement in space? What sort of people would that need?
Very patient and level people. You're going to be living in a tuna can with the same 3 people for the rest of your life. Can you do that without freaking out and killing them? I think is the first question that every applicant should have to answer. And people have brought up this point of that, you know, anyone can learn something with training, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, some people are more mathematically inclined, some people are more creative. Some people, I mean, I have no ability for math. You could teach me for 10 years and I'd still not be able to, you know, do actual rocket science. I think there's a lot of sort of, you do need people with certain backgrounds and certain innate abilities to train them into the crew that you need. And the other thing, I mean, speaking of sort of the mental stability issue, is I don't really think we can ever actually anticipate how people are going to react on Mars. I mean, we've had simulations like the Mars 500 where 6 men lived in a simulated Mars habitat for 500 days, but, you know, somewhere in the recesses of their minds, they knew that they were still on Earth. I think when you take the Earth away, you can't predict how people are actually going to react when they realize just how far away they are from everything they've ever known. And that to me is a huge hurdle.
I should tell you, I've just had a message from someone called Andreas Scheppers on Google+. He says, greetings from ESOC, where we actually fly Europe's Mars Express around Mars. Well, Andreas, welcome. Thank you for watching. If you've got any more comments on what you've been hearing just now, post that on our Google+ thread as you watch this hangout. David, come in. What sort of work has been done on this issue?
Interesting that Mars Express has just been mentioned. Mars Express was launched in June 2003, and I was fortunate enough to watch the launch. And it was an extraordinarily thrilling sight to see a rocket take off from Baikonur in Kazakhstan, to journey through millions of miles of space to Mars. Now, on board the Mars Express, so that was the good bit. The bad bit was that on board Mars Express was the little British lander called Beagle 2, which was a brilliantly designed piece of engineering that was meant to land on Mars and look for signs of life. I was among many journalists on Christmas Day 2003 who waited and waited and waited for a signal to come from Beagle from the surface of Mars, and we never got the signal because it crashed. So there in one story, and I'm really glad Mars Express has been mentioned, you've got the thrill of discovery, of exploration, of journeying through space, but also the extreme risks, the hazards, as I say, right back to where I started. Space is difficult. Mars Express exemplifies that.
And our 30 minutes is very close to being up. I just want to bring one last comment in from Dan, who posted this on the US, and a similar point actually from Raymond in Germany. Dan said, space exploration teaches nations to work together and inspires everyone with a curious scientific mind. Science, including space travel, is one of the best investments governments can make. Engineers and scientists are exactly the sort of people who can meaningfully contribute to the world outside of their jobs. I think what Dan was getting at there, and also Raymond, David, are the potential knock-on effects, not only the exploration itself, but what projects like this can lend other things that we do in society and on Earth itself.
I think it's an incredible project for just showing what imagination can lead you to. I mean, you know, talking to them this morning, they've really given this a lot of thought. And, you know, it's actually exciting to be amongst people who've really got a vision. Now, that vision may never happen. Any number of obstacles may arise, but it's interesting that it gets people talking and thinking. And if you apply that kind of visionary thinking to a host of other questions, like getting clean water to everybody on Earth, to give you one example, who knows what kind of solutions might arise.
The flip side of that was that people like Dennis in Kampala posting on our Facebook page saying, I sometimes wonder why we want to spend too much on impossibilities, and yet possibilities just surround us, use that so much money and help the poor people of this planet. Let's go to Amy, and to start with, do you buy into the notion that this would be a good investment for the Earth to send people into space because of the knock-on effects potentially, as well as the thing itself?
On the Mars One mission, no, but in general, yes. The trickle down, I mean, I'm more familiar with NASA than with anything the ESA has done.
And I saw you had the mug there earlier on.
Yes. The trickle down technologies from what NASA's developed are incredible, and people don't really know how much better their daily lives have been because of space exploration. I mean, my favorite example is the autonomous rendezvous technology that NASA developed is what was the basic for LASIK surgery, eye surgery, which is pretty neat. So NASA developed good vision. And we kind of forget that these things happen, and I really am a proponent of space exploration because of the trickle-down technologies, if not for the fact that we actually do get to learn about the universe around us. Yeah. Not sure what will come of developing Mars One, though.
Rajat, final word to you from Mumbai?
Well, of course, I always believe that we should invest in science and space exploration. We come to know about a lot of things, new developments, new technologies being developed. The only problem I have with Mars One is the whole, reality show aspect of it, and putting, non-trained or non-professional people up there. I won't like to bet my money on someone who's not trained to be an astronaut.
Well, thank you all. We've got to leave it there. With our 30 minutes are up. But thanks so much to our guests, Amy there in Phoenix, Arizona. Euromaestro was with us from Paris. We had Melissa there from Hull in the north of England. Rajat was with us from Mumbai, India. And Sunny, thanks for being with us from London. Thanks to all of you as well for your comments on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Google+. You can watch this all the way through if you missed any part of it on bbc.com/news. And on World Have Your Say, this Friday on BBC World News TV, we'll be able to show you some highlights from it as well, 1500 GMT.